I bought every single Nintendo 64 controller on Amazon, and we're gonna rank them in a Nintendo 64 controllers tier list. Turns out there's at least 7 different Nintendo 64 controllers you can purchase on Amazon, while Nintendo themselves only manufactured one style of controller. Other than the original style, you'll find your basic third-party controller, a Nintendo 64 to USB controller, the Brawler 64 by Retro Fighters, then the illustrious Hori mini pad that a lot of speedrunners prefer, although getting this on Amazon, you'll basically find a cheap knockoff. We'll also look at a much more normalized version of the N64 controller and a wireless counterpart called the Admiral, which is pretty damn sexy. I've tested all of these controllers out not just on emulator on PC, but also on an original N64 console. For all of the controllers I'm testing on emulator, I am going to be using the Hyperkin adapter. It converts your Nintendo 64 controller to a USB connector. I didn't notice any input lag on this whatsoever, and it was incredibly convenient. So I would definitely recommend this if you do not have a Nintendo 64 console on hand, but you still would like to play N64 games. And I've tested all these controllers with 3 of the most popular games for the Nintendo 64, The Legend of Zelda, the Ocarina of Time, GoldenEye 007, and of course, Super Mario 64. Starting with the original Nintendo 64 OEM controller, we're taking a look at my original gold version of this controller that I've had since I was a kid, and it still works pretty flawlessly. These original controllers that were actually manufactured by Nintendo have a crazy lifespan on them and a pretty good amount of durability if you are going to be grinding specific games. Obviously, you have your basic button layout here and the singular Z button on the back of the controller. The buttons on this controller are incredibly responsive. You never have to really worry about any button sticking or anything that you would get normally from a third-party controller. The control stick is absolutely flawless. You get all 8 notches with precise control and platforming that you would get in some of these titles. And you'll notice the difference between these controllers and any third-party knockoff by looking for the Nintendo insignia right on the front. Any third-party controller will most likely have that area blank. Whether your fingers are large or small, you are going to feel right at home when using it. I have to obviously throw the original N64 controller in the S tier. It was literally made for the console. Regardless of what your opinions are on any of these other ones that we look at, you gotta put this at the top of the list because it is exactly how we remember playing this console. Next up, we're gonna take a look at the third-party Nintendo 64 controllers, your standard classic model, but made from whatever questionable seller has them on Amazon. No Nintendo logo on the front, just like with all third-party controllers. I noticed that the buttons stick out a little bit more than your original style Nintendo 64 controller. But if we take a look at the control stick, there's something a little off. Your standard Nintendo 64 controller has 8 notches for the control stick. And now looking at the third-party controller I bought, this is going to be a word of caution for anybody looking to buy a knockoff. Take notice of the control stick before you buy, because this controller, and I didn't notice this until after I got it, but it is missing the notches on the left and right side. Yes, I'm not kidding. You can go up, you can go down, you can hit your corners, but left and right are a solid straight wall. So you can't specifically hit left or right perfectly. I don't know what they were thinking with this design. It severely limits you when playing, and I could tell right away that there was just something off when I looked at the controller. But it wasn't until I actually plugged it in that I realized what the problem was. And to top it all off, if you want to know the overall quality of these Nintendo 64 third-party controllers, look no further than this. Yeah, that's right. It doesn't even work. The control stick is stuck going down permanently, even though the control stick is completely normal or I'm pushing it up or any other direction. It is completely stuck inputting down for whatever reason. So I could barely even give it a proper test. But I think that the control stick design, it's kind of just all you need to really know. This shit writes itself. This controller is actually down bad. I'm putting this one, well, there's only S, A, B, and C. I'm gonna change C to F. And I'm gonna just put this bad boy right down there. Get nice and cozy, because that's where you belong. If you can't get your hands on an original version, then make sure you at least check the product photos before you buy, and to make sure it has the correct control stick. Now on to the USB port version of the Nintendo 64. 64 controller. This one is slightly different just from looking at it. And I don't mean from the USB port. What's different about this one, you say? The control stick. Again, I'm not really sure how to explain this, but the control stick is too skinny. I'm not really sure, but they made a gaping crater where the control stick is resting. So now the notches that you would normally be used to hitting on your normal N64 controller are actually in slightly different locations. They're a little bit wider and spaced out with this controller, so your calibration is going to be off. As far as input lag or any other type of responsive issues with this controller, I didn't notice any at all. The buttons seemed like they were in good quality, but this control stick is just a travesty, and it's really hard to explain unless you're actually using them or looking directly at each version. The USB N64 controller is going down in the B tier. That's really the best I could do for it. While it is pretty convenient for people that don't have a console on hand, just buy the Hyperkin adapter. That is the way to go if you're going to do it this way. Now moving on to the thick version of the Nintendo 64 controller. This is really your standardized Xbox controller size. You have the same layout as you would on a Hori mini pad, although this is a slightly larger version. With the Hori mini pad condensing the buttons a little bit more, things are a little more spaced out on this style of controller, and I would highly recommend this controller if you happen to have large hands. This is where the controller styles really start getting interesting as far as whatever your preferred play style is. Starting with the actual interface, the control stick is honestly one of my favorite control sticks I've ever used for these controllers. The stick is covered in rubber, which gives you a nice grip, especially if you happen to get sweaty hands while playing the game. The notches on it are extremely solid. As long as you can recalibrate your controller properly, you should have no problems at all with readjusting to this control stick. This controller feels very comfortable in your hands and is exactly what you would expect from any standard controller. So if you were really looking to kind of pick up and play and not used to the Nintendo 64 controller, it might feel a little alien to you. So this preferably would be the way to go if you are maybe a newer N64 player or a more casual N64 player, I should say. Probably my favorite part about this controller, though, are the additional Z buttons on the shoulders, which makes timing Z presses a breeze. And you can even use the left or right Z button, whichever you prefer. This is a really solid controller. I'm going to put this in the A tier. For anybody that really doesn't want to use the original style, this is absolutely your next best thing. Now moving on to the Hori mini pad, or the knockoff Hori mini pad that you'll get on Amazon, because I'm pretty sure that you'll never find a Hori mini pad for about $20. A slightly condensed version of the controller we just looked at, where your D-pad is going to be more centered. Since the size is a little condensed, even the start button is a little bit smaller to kind of fit everything. The control stick on this is absolutely flawless, especially if you're looking to improve your Bowser throws. This is a great controller to do it. This also has the Z buttons located on the shoulder as well to give you that ease of access. But the one big downside I did notice between this and the previous style controller that we looked at is that with a lot of heavy usage, your A button tends to stick a little bit. Whether or not there's a remedy to fix that, if you are thinking of grinding and beating the hell out of these controllers, you might want to look into one that is a little bit more high quality, because these third-party ones on Amazon definitely tend to have a much shorter lifespan. But as far as an overall controller goes and where this fits on the tier list, I gotta give this one an A as well. It's not the original Hori mini pad, but it's pretty damn close. I've used this one quite often and had a lot of success with it. Now onto the Brawler 64 by Retro Fighters. This is a newer model that I've been seeing. I had to pick one up myself and give it a try. Right away, I noticed a significant difference between this and the other controllers, and not something particularly good. And that is the control stick. This controller is really well made, but I'm not really sure what they were thinking as far as testing this controller out with this stick. The top of it is completely smoothed out with this very light rubber material that does not give you grip at all. There are no ridges where your thumb goes on the stick, so it's easy for your thumb to slide off. And you have these rounded corners where your notches are going to be. So as far as your precision goes, it is slightly different in feel. The buttons themselves are much lower implemented into the controller, so they don't stick out as much, but it all still feels very smooth. You do have an additional turbo button on the controller if that is useful for you, but you do have the Z buttons located on the shoulders, and they work work very well as a normal trigger would that you would see on an Xbox or a PlayStation type controller. It also comes with a really sick box as opposed to a plastic bag like most third-party controllers would come in. Other than that, this controller is not for speedrunners, although it is absolutely perfect for anybody that's going to be playing casual games. That control stick is a deal breaker for me because I'm a nervous wreck and I get sweaty hands when I play, and my thumb slips more on this controller than any other one, so just keep that in mind. I'm gonna be throwing this, though, into the A tier. I wouldn't feel right putting this any lower because, although it is not perfect for your top tier players, this is exactly what you're looking for as far as comfortability in your hands and also just simple gameplay. We're moving on to the Hyperkin Admiral, the wireless Nintendo 64 controller. Now, I know you're thinking wireless controller, that sounds awful in terms of input delay, but you're not really going to be getting that with this. The design for the Hyperkin is very smooth. It comes in a white and a black version, and it just feels high quality when it's in your hands. Very durable as well, and those buttons are as flat as people say the earth is on Facebook. The Admiral comes with a wireless receiver that you can plug into your console or into your Hyperkin adapter on your PC, and it works up to 30 feet away. I never really understood why that is a selling point for wireless controllers. It's not like I'm going to be as far away from my television as I possibly can be. But also don't forget about the memory pack slot that you find on the receiver. Of course, the Admiral, just like the last few, has that new style with the Z buttons located on the shoulders, but I'd say the biggest difference other than the look and the wireless capabilities, again, that control stick. It is the biggest separator between all of these controllers. This control stick, very flat and does have the slight ridges, although this is an extremely tiny control stick. It has a similar size to the control stick on the normal N64 controller, but that just goes for the top part. The actual bottom part of the stick is very short. My thumb did slip a lot on this control stick. I'm not sure if that has to do with the flat top part of the control stick or not, but as far as trying to nail a speedrunning skip or something of that nature, this might make things slightly more difficult. But as far as the overall presentation goes for this controller, I'm going to be putting it in the A tier as well. This is extremely high quality, and you should not have any problems that you would get with the normal third-party controllers with the buttons sticking over time. Overall, I review my own tier list as pretty solid, and just stay away from this controller. Just seriously, just stay away from it. Look at it, now stay far away from it.